Okay, this lake you see behind me is really born out of a community that was started way back when. But it's an 88-acre lake setting in a rural community with farmland all around us. And as this community grew and was developed, the developers actually took a stream that ran through here and developed this lake. And this lake certainly is just part of a watershed that's 10,000 acres around us. In 1978, the River Conservancy District was born. And as the RCD was developed, one of the things that we understood as of late is that we had responsibility not only to maintain this lake, this particular part of the watershed, but also improve the lake and the watershed around it. And over the years, the Conservancy District was charged with monitoring the conservation of the lake, which encompasses a lot of things, from pollution to fish to wildlife to lake use and those types of things.
So the River Conservancy District first recognized that they had problems with their lake, and also recognized that these problems don't just stem on their property but upstream from them and what's coming down into the lake from neighboring properties. And there's not one spot. You can't point to one source. So therefore it's called non-point source pollution. It's just a cumulative effect of pollutants coming from many, many different places.
Anytime you have sedimentation or sediment coming in or being eroded off the shorelines or off the stream banks or out of agricultural fields, it becomes a non-point source pollution problem. The sediment itself is a pollutant because it degrades the water quality and silts in the lake and causes environmental concern. But there's also nutrients associated with those sediments that are coming into the lake, which feed algal conditions and algal problems, weed issues, and other environmental factors that need to be remediated.
When you stabilize stream banks, the benefit to water quality is largely that you're holding back the sediment and soil that is on the slope. The rule of thumb is you want to keep the ground on the ground, and you don't want it in the water. And once you get soil in the water, it becomes a pollutant in and of itself because it degrades the water clarity, which degrades the habitat. Fish can't see to capture their prey. Aquatic plants no longer have sunlight to grow. When sediment is allowed to enter the stream or the lake, it carries with it a lot of pollutants. In the situation around the lake, we're dealing with homes that have lawns straight up to the lake's edge. And anytime there's a storm event, that water, that runoff that's running over the lawn and into the stream is going to carry with it any fertilizers that they used on the lawn, and it's going to carry with it any soil if there are bare spots on the lawn, and it's going to carry away the dog poop, the goose poop. All that is going, once it gets into the water, then it's a problem. When upstream, we're dealing with kind of similar substances, but a different situation. Now the fertilizer's coming from farm fields, and the soil becomes a much bigger problem because every year those fields are tilled, and so we are dealing with large expanses of bare spots, basically, that are not covered in some sort of grass cover. And so if you're dealing with a pasture, a lot of people think that cows are a big problem for water quality, but when you look at just the land use, the grass that is a pasture has a much better capacity of capturing sediment and pollutants before it enters the stream when you compare that to a bare crop field. The area that flows through Babbling Brook is about 3,000 acres that comes in from that tributary directly into the lake. There's a separate tributary that drains the rest of the 11,000 acre watershed. And what really brought a lot of awareness to the people who live here and see this area day in and day out was a storm event that happened in 2009. And the storm event in 2009 absolutely blew the banks out of the Babbling Brook. What was considered a lazy little creek turned into a 15-foot wide creek that had banks of solid soil, 90-degree angle, that were about 6 feet tall.
Well, during the flow, the banks were significantly eroded, and there's a sharp bend in the stream that the water angle attacked and significantly eroded the bank back into a homeowner's property. This created a lot of turbulence in that area, and that created a significant amount of erosion.
The Babbling Brook actually washed out a bridge, lost probably 12 to 15 foot of shoreline along the stream bank on big reaches of the stream.
This is what the old-timers will call a 100-year flood. And the experts will tell you it fell within the definition of a 100-year flood. That being said, and the mission of the RCD in terms of taking care of the lake, not only for what it is today, but planning for the future, led to our thought of a project to stabilize the stream bank on Babbling Brook. To do that, we had to get a team of experts involved early on.
One of the things we did here is we established a team of individuals that can address all the different topics in a professional fashion. One, you've got an environmental or lake consultant that gives you the background and the things that are needed from an environmental and a pollution control perspective. You've got an engineer that can help design projects that have the stability to withstand the flow conditions over a long period of time. Then you have to have people like Rebecca that has a grant writing ability and a planting background to ensure that we have the right plants in place and can actually secure funding to assist with a project like this. And you have to have a project coordinator like Steve that's going to go out and do the groundwork to get the people in place and the landowners to agree to what's going on and understand what's going on, and to have a group buy-in to make sure this is a successful program. And we all sat down to discuss what we could do to actually establish a program that would be cost effective and reduce the nutrients and the sediment and the non-point source problems that we have within this lake. One of the first things we did was we established a riprap program within the lake itself. There's a lot of exposed soils along the lake bank, and with that, that's a point where our property owners can take individual involvement and stabilize their own personal shorelines, which has a benefit for their own property value as well as an ecological benefit, environmental benefit for the lake itself. We developed a riprap program, one, because of the cost to install, and two, the ease of maintenance and longevity to the program once our landowners got it established. And to do this, they graded their slope back on their banks, put down a bedding fabric, put down a bedding material, and put down an RR3 rock, which is a rock that was gauged for the stream flow conditions within the lake.
It's much more costly to remove soil once it gets in the lake than when it's sitting there on the shoreline. So this was a cost-effective way to lessen a pollutant in the lake. So we established that program, and we had quite a few property owners take advantage of that. We actually were able to stabilize about 70% of the shoreline that was pre-identified as the most problematic to the lake.
Now focusing on the stream bank, there's about 800 feet of stream bank that we decided we're going to stabilize as an effort to minimize soil coming into the lake.
The purpose of the remediation had three goals. One was to control erosion, which was significant in this reach. The second was to maintain the flow through the reach. And the third was to create or enhance the habitat.
We used a series of techniques to stabilize the section of Babbling Brook. our project area. And part of the reason that we used a variety of techniques was to show people what different methods could be used, with the idea that they'll learn from this. This is a stretch that they can come and see and then recognize, well, I have a similar problem on my stretch, and now I see what I can do, and start the ball rolling for other people to do projects on their own properties throughout the watershed. And so if you start from the bridge and work your way upstream, the bridge, it's kind of a channel. In fact, most of the area we're working in had been channelized at one time, which led to some of these problems in the first place, because a naturally meandering stream is going to be able to handle the force of a storm better than a channelized area. And so right next to the bridge, we have the most channelized area that needed the most reinforcement.
One of the areas had a very steep bank that we could not change the slope on. With that, we decided to use a gabion structure.
Gabion baskets were selected for the area of the high bank because there was a road at the top of the bank that could not be moved, and the bank had to remain where it was. So the gabion baskets were a perfect fit. The gabion baskets themselves consist of pre-manufactured wire baskets that are set in place, individually filled with rock, closed, and then another basket set adjacent to it, individually filled and closed.
And you can build a wall on a slope that's much, much steeper. And so we used that in the area where we didn't have a lot of room to work.
One of the issues with utilizing gabion baskets, though, they're very expensive. The labor-intense construction of a basket, it costs a lot of money to do these. However, when you have a situation where you cannot grade back a slope, this is an ideal stability that has a long-term effect in preventing shoreline from being eroded again. Areas where we can actually lay a slope back, we decided that we would do a riprap structure that had a RR5 rock, which is about a 90 to 100 pound rock. Each boulder is about that big. So in the stream flow, in the heavy conditions we have here, those rocks won't be moving.
We use riprap in areas where we could because of its economy, but in order to do that, the stream bank had to be regraded to slopes not exceeding 2 to 1, preferably 3 to 1, and then prepared with a geotextile fabric and granular bedding to set the riprap on. The slope had to be laid back to a slope no steeper than 2 to 1 because the natural angle of repose for rock is slightly less than that. We wanted to make sure that in its natural state the rock would stay where we put it, and also under stream flow conditions when it was attacked by a velocity coming through there with the water force that the rock did not move. Going through the hydraulic design for the stream, velocities were established at different reaches of the creek. Where the riprap was selected, velocities were determined and the riprap was sized to combat the velocity forces of the water. At the stream's edge, a trench was dug in which bedding was put in and riprap was keyed in to keep the bottom of the riprap from eroding and also to keep the riprap from sliding into the channel. The toe of the riprap is significant in maintaining the riprap face because that's where the erosion is controlled that would allow the riprap to slide down into the stream bed.
We also utilized in the areas that had just flow conditions but not a heavy brunt force, we utilized a program with coir fiber, native plantings, and a mesh matting. Both the mesh and the coir fiber were both gauged to withstand flow conditions of 10 feet per second or more, which is conducive to the environment we're dealing with here at the Lost Lake.
The mat was chosen based on the velocity of the stream. Mats available in different densities depending on the velocity it has to resist and its porosity to allow for plantings. The mat we selected matched the velocity of the stream and was also able to be planted in place.
I worked with Dick, the engineer, to come up with a solution for those areas of the stream that weren't receiving the direct current, that weren't receiving the brunt force of the water. In order to consider vegetation for the site, you do need a certain slope. If a site is too steep, you're not going to have good success. So you have to have a slope that is about a 3-to-1 ratio, which means step up 1 foot, step back 3 foot. And if you were to do that, instead of having a stair step, if you were to lay a slope on that, that would be a 3-to-1. Anything 3-to-1 or less steep is suitable for vegetation. We chose to use grass and wildflower mixes in any area that we could have used vegetation along the shoreline. And the reason for that, there are several reasons. One is that the native grasses and wildflowers they have extensive root systems that hold the soil much better than agricultural grass or brome or any other the non-native choices. The reason we decided to use grass and wildflowers instead of shrubs, basically you get more coverage on that bank. Shrubs can lead to shady spots and bare areas, and so we felt that the grass and wildflowers would be a better solution for this particular site. We had to take into consideration the velocity of the water and how much energy that areas were going to receive by the water. And so we used seed for the most part because it's a large area, and so that it's suitable to do seed from a cost perspective. It also is easier to manage than if you were to use seedlings. And we only use seedlings right at the bottom of the slope where we had core logs. And the core logs are, it's coconut fiber that's rolled, and it takes the energy of the water for about 5 years. It takes about 5 years to degrade, and that is a good length of time to allow the vegetation to establish. And once that vegetation is established, then it will hold the water and hold up to the force of the water at the bottom, the erosive forces. Until then, that coconut fiber is necessary. And so we were able to put seedlings into the coconut fiber. We used several different mixes of grasses and wildflowers because you're dealing with a slope. So the plants that like to have wet feet are on a strip just where the water's edge meets that slope. Once you start going up the slope, we change into a mix of plants that are like drier conditions. We planted tall vegetation because reed canary grass is a problem here, as it is in most wet areas in Illinois. And to outcompete that reed canary grass, you want tall native vegetation. And then once you get to the top of the slope, reed canary grass is no longer a big issue. We switched to short vegetation, and that was for beautification reasons and for homeowners because these areas back up to backyards, it blends well into a more manicured setting. And so what we'll end up having is the manicured yard will come right up to a mix that we just call it the homeowner's mix. It's shorter grasses, about 3 feet tall, with flowers popping up out of that. And then once you hit the slope, then it's the taller vegetation that's more designed for that weed control and holding the bank.
Some of the areas that we had to have a nice smooth transition and flow, we decided we would go ahead and put in what's called an articulated block. Now, one of the issues there too is the landowner there needed direct access to the creek and the stream for their normal activities of how they like to enjoy it. Not to mention the fact it was a stream bank that had a hard cut from the erosive forces of that flood. With that hit of the water in that area, we couldn't just do a slope and seed or anything like that. We had to put in an armoring or a bioengineering method known as an articulated block. This is a block that's actually mesh wired together with cable, and it looks like a puzzle. That's laid onto the soils, keyed in on the top, keyed in on the sides, and free floating as a foot. So if there's any soil erosion at the foot, it continues to fall down and cover it, and provides the necessary protection to keep that soil in place.
When the block was installed, the top row at the top of the bank was keyed into a trench. This prohibited the block from sliding down the trench. The upstream edge of the block was keyed in also to a trench so that the oncoming flow would not get under the block. One of the nice things about using articulated block is the voids between the block can be filled with dirt and planted. Eventually, the block will vegetate itself, and in time, without erosive forces, the block will be fully vegetated and maintain the structural protection without being seen.
To apply for a grant from the EPA, you need to be as close to the source of the problem as possible. You need to effectively address the problem. So you need to identify what the pollutants are and how your project is going to help in quantitative numbers. The grant that was secured to stabilize Babbling Brook and Lost Lake shoreline, it was given to us by the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency through their Section 319 funding. And Section 319 came out of some legislation from the Clean Water Act. And the Environmental Protection Agency in that capacity is interested in water quality. And so our project is also interested in water quality, which made them the right fit. The EPA is looking to fund projects that address watershed issues. They're looking for multiple locations. They're looking for multiple participation. What they want to do is, let's say that the solution is that we're going to restore wetlands. Instead of just restoring one wetland, which is fine, they want to fund a project that's going to restore several wetlands, and in one swoop, with all the administration that goes into this grant, in one swoop we're going to be able to address the issue 3 times or 5 times as well as if we were just to do one site. The other thing they're looking for is they're looking for combining techniques. So let's not only restore wetland, let's restore wetland plus put in filter strips next to farm fields, plus let's restore the stream banks and combine the different techniques that would, once again, instead of just having a certain pollutant load reduction, let's magnify that 3, 5, 10 times in one project because the administration of these grants is so large.
One of the things people need to keep focus on is the fact that the watershed itself is impacted by more than just an individual. And when you take a holistic approach like we've done here to improve the watershed and the condition of the watershed, you've actually impacted more than the individual landowners. This project's encompassed several different landowners as well as all the different people at Lost Lake and people downstream, because the water quality that's in this lake is also running downstream into the Rock River. So any impact you do on the watershed has impacts throughout for everybody.